Hi, good morning everyone. Welcome to our latest Shaping Fintech webinar. We've been doing webinars since, you guessed it, the start of lockdown, as many people kind of moved all their events online. This is the first time appearing on LinkedIn Live, so I'm resisting the urge to tap the screen and ask if this thing is on. But we're really excited to be here and hopefully make the discussion available to not just Fintech Alliance community, but also some new viewers who might not have seen us before. This month we've been talking about building your brand, and we had an excellent webinar a couple of weeks ago on developing the right product and identity and building things that are really needed in financial services at the moment. So of course it kind of naturally follows on from there that we would explore today, how do we understand our customers? We all have customers, whether that's our clients in the B2B space or the end users of various digital platforms, and it's vital to get to know who they really are, what appeals to them and how they want to work or live their life. So today we're going to be looking at data and the journey from having this massive information actually to being able to use it and build relationships with clients, market your product and maintain that kind of loyalty and trust into the long term, especially today when everything happens without meeting people face to face. So I'm delighted to be joined by our panel today. We have Charlie from FeedStock, Philip from Solidators, Sam from Dun & Bradstreet and Jack from Metal. So it's a really great selection of speakers who I think really be able to take us on that journey from where we are today when it comes to understanding data and how we'll use it in the future to cement those customer relationships. I'll be asking the questions and hopefully you won't hear too much more from me, but we will have some time for the audience Q&A as well. So please do send in any questions for any or all of the panelists and we'll try to get those answered in the discussion. To start, I'm just going to ask everyone to quickly introduce themselves and we'll start with Sam.
Hi, Olivia. Well, thank you for having me. My name's Sam. I am the International Chief Marketing Officer for Dun & Bradstreet, which is a 200-nearly-year-old data analytics business in every market around the world.
Great. And Charlie?
Hi, my name's Charlie. I'm the co-founder and CEO of FeedStock, and we are a client analytics business, client analytics startup, working exclusively in financial services.
Excellent. And Philip?
Hi, yes, and thanks, Olivia. Philip Dutton, I'm one of the co-founders and co-CEO of Solidators. We're a metadata management company, primarily initially focused in the financial services space, but actually, as data is kind of ubiquitous to all industries, we're cross-vertical. So, thanks very much for having me.
Great, and last but not least, Jack.
Hello, yeah, I'm Jack. I'm the Chief Marketing Officer at Metal. Metal's the free digital account by NatWest. Basically for anyone who wants to start up something for themselves, whether that just be a small side hustle all the way through to a small business, and we sort of meet all of their banking needs.
Excellent. Well, thank you for joining us, everyone. And I want to start by just looking at kind of where we are now when it comes to using and harnessing data to understand customers. It's definitely changed over the past few years, and especially with 2020 when everything went remote and digital. So it'd be good to hear all your perspectives on that. Sam, could we start from you, what you've seen over the past year, I suppose?
Yeah, thanks, Olivia. So the world obviously has changed a huge amount. And when we're talking about understanding your customer, primarily we've got to start at the root source of understanding a customer. And short of having conversations with them, it's really about the data quality. And the world has changed an enormous amount. And maybe I can just summarize a few of those areas that may underpin the rest of our conversation. The first thing that happened, a huge change, was the extension of filing deadlines. So in the UK, they granted a 3-month extension. That was great, but many firms then leave it until the last minute, which means the CRAs get less data to help with the analysis. And then the company's house nearly breaks when everyone files it at the last minute. We've also had a disruption of the typical data collection processes. If you think about registries and courts that need to sit and process filings, those aren't happening at the moment, which means less accurate and timely data, support risk management, modeling, segmentation, all of that stuff. That said, a lot of the historic processes are starting to change. So managing export documentation is managed by the British Chamber of Commerce and was all done in paper format. That's now being shifted into digital thanks to COVID. Although there are a number of third countries where they continue to demand the physical stamp documentation. There's been a huge shift to automation, and that won't surprise anyone. We've seen a rapid step up in firms automating all aspects of their business, which has obviously had a huge impact in terms of the data that's available. There's been a much dependence on data. Travel restrictions have prevented on-site supplier visits, for example, which means there's less diligence and there's more dependency on data decisioning, and that's across the board, not just with suppliers. There's been increased uncertainty in how we, particularly at Dun & Bradstreet and other data firms, model and use risk modeling. So in an industry built upon ratings and scores, they've had to, and typically historical data to predict future risk, they've had to hugely change their approach. And Dun & Bradstreet's COVID impact scores are a good example of shifting that model around. And then finally, risk. There's an enormous amount of risk through the ecosystem that we're now having to think about. When you think about supply chain risk, you may have only thought about disruptions to supply chains and, say, natural disasters. But actually, across the world, we're seeing different types of supply chain risk and ESG risk due to lack of data in those fields. So very different landscape. I guess the takeaway from that is obviously you need a trusted partner. So why go anywhere else?
Of course, thanks so much, Sam. And Philip, it'd be interesting to hear from your point of view at Solidatus, what has changed? You know, Sam's mentioned automation and also the kind of shifts we've gone through in terms of things like risk and just the availability of data too.
Yeah, I think really obviously the big change is the move to remote work. Once everyone is no longer in an office, you don't have those abilities to share information really very easily, share that data. And so as Sam pointed out, trust in data therefore needs to be much more significant, because you don't have that ability to verify and validate with some colleague or an external entity to say, is this accurate, is this correct, can I trust this data, what's the quality? So I think the remote working has really changed the face of what we're dealing with. And I think the automation piece is a really good example of where certainly a lot of the fintechs have been able to say very quickly and with great agility, say, actually, this doesn't make a big difference to us because we're focused on automation. We're focused on keeping that supply chain really efficient and not having the side input as being necessary to decisioning. For us and Solidatus, and I think one of the interesting things is we deal with linked data. It's all about how things are interconnected, and I think that's a really interesting piece when you start to think about the disparate data sets that we're having to pull together. So, Sam mentioned some of those, the modeling there, being able to get access to the right data sets, but understand how those data sets fit together is crucially important now for that decisioning process. And at Solidatus, I think that's one of the areas that we're really trying to focus on is how do we bring context to distinct data sets that are actually interconnected and really see those interconnected pieces. So it's very much I think a shifting landscape, and I don't think it will go back to the way it was, but I think this has given us lots of opportunities to actually move things forward dramatically, where you may have seen a much slower adoption of cloud or a much slower adoption of automation. I think this has really been an impetus for people to go, this is something we need to really force ourselves to look at now. So I think it's been actually a positive for the technological move forward.
Definitely. And Charlie, we know at FeedStock it's all about kind of that trust element, I suppose, that Philip spoke about, and maintaining those relationships even when we can't meet face to face. So what have you seen shift over this year?
Yeah, I think, well, what's really interesting is obviously the digital shift from in person. And if people are no longer seeing each other, what are they missing? And if we look at, for example, the number of data points we process a second, it's around 11 million data points a second. So when we scale it up to what are we processing a day, we're looking at like 600 billion data points a day. So, and then 200 trillion data points a year. But if we think about, if you used to get a lot of data points from meeting people, talking to people, talking to your clients, talking to your colleagues, meeting them on a sort of minute by minute basis, and that's gone, then what do you replace it with? So as Philip says around data trust, like if you're trying to replace something that you've trusted as an individual for your whole life and that's gone, then the data that is replacing it to help you make those decisions needs to be as good, if not better, than previously. And that's that's what's so interesting now is we're at Basecamp. We have all these disparate data sources. They're all slightly messy. They're all over the shop. So how do we bring it together and sort of unify it as to what we were used to before as individuals?
Sure, and Jack, that's really interesting to hear from you as well in terms of Metal. How is that data currently being brought together into one source, and what do we need to do in the future to make it better, I guess?
Yeah, I mean, we're probably more of a user and digester of data, I guess. Thinking back just like over the last year, right, everyone's, it's been uncertain for everyone, but what we've spotted from looking at all these different sources is there's actually been a huge shift in the way, especially across the UK, the way people have been working. There's been a huge acceleration of businesses being formed, of people earning a secondary income to complement their primary income. And that's mainly driven by the fact that lots of people are being unfortunately made redundant. 200,000, I think, in the last quarter, which is 5%, which is shocking, really. And hundreds of thousands more people being on furlough. And that means there's a rapid acceleration, right, of people challenging the way they do things, right? And I think for business banking or anything to do with business finance in any way, there's sort of a shift to try and understand these customers in a more effective way. And actually, the traditional services aren't fit for purpose anymore. This customer, just for an example, this customer set, they don't want a business account, a cumbersome business account, because they don't want to pay for it, but also they don't need half of the services attached to it. And conversely, they may be using a personal account, which actually means that they're unable to segregate their finances. There's a whole tax quagmire. And so I think being able to effectively spot those trends and use the data and sort of to understand what the actual needs, the core needs are, I think is incredibly more important. And actually, coming back to your point, guys, around trust and validity of some of this data, it kind of means that the previous sets of data and trends that we have almost become a little redundant. It's historic, and actually it's the here and now that we need to sort of understand so that we can better create services to meet those customer needs. And obviously for Metal, it's trying to create that new suite of services that customers actually need, as opposed to forcing them down a path that we've traditionally gone down.
Definitely, thanks. And I think we need to talk a bit more later about how you kind of developed that product to the market. That's kind of, I guess, grown over the past year, as you mentioned. But a question's actually just come in that I want to touch on now, because it pertains to what Charlie was talking about the way we kind of communicate now. Rachel's asked, do you believe there are more opportunities for data collection and knowledge management because communication is mainly digital now? I'll just throw that out to the whole panel, I suppose, because I'm sure you've all got some views on that.
Yeah, and I'm happy to jump in here. I think we're collecting data points differently, as Charlie mentioned. So previously, when you're having those human interactions, you're able to get a sense of trust and a sense of the information, the quality of the information. When it becomes purely digitized and put into just a data repository, I think the element of can I trust something that comes out of a black box is greatly reduced. And I think certainly for us, and one of the things that we're focusing on is actually the visualization of data, because the visualization of data really gives you back that connected element to the data. So understanding not only your clients, but all of the elements that sit around your clients, whether it be around the type of deals that you're doing with them, who else they're dealing with, what the underlying business models are, or whatever data you're able to capture and bring together as a data set. And so I think in terms of the data collection, there is a huge opportunity to collect more data. I think the challenge with that is, what we've seen over the last, say, 30 years with data collection is data quality isn't high enough for us to have that level of trust. And so it's how do we address not necessarily the capture, but the quality. I think that's the real focus, because if the data doesn't have sufficient quality, then it really isn't. It's just data. There's no knowledge. There's no information there. And I think that's the challenge that I see. We are collecting so much data now, but being able to tell what is a good set of data versus what is an average set of data versus what is a bad set of data is really very, very difficult. I think that's where we need to place a lot of our focus.
I think Philip makes some great points. I think if you think about the world we live in today, and some of the points I made at the start, we're in a world of hyper disruption, and the world scarily will never move this slowly again. But the data, we call it real-time data all the time, but it's not real-time data. 99% of the time, there's a real lag based on filings, based on the type of sourcing. I think one of the biggest opportunities we have is through alternate data and the ability to actually acquire real-time data from the source and make it readily available. And there's a lot of interesting technologies surrounding that space. But whenever you hear the word real-time data, challenge it, because very rarely is it actually real-time.
Yeah, I guess the other point I'd quite like to raise, just from a customer point of view, is customers are becoming incredibly more aware of the value of their own data and what data they're giving away, even if it's like inferred, right, usage data. We're seeing huge questioning of big tech, big data, and people are starting to realize, actually, I don't particularly want to participate in that, and I'll actively look for other services out there that are a bit more conscious of data usage. And I think it's quite nascent at the moment, right? It's a small section of the population, but as more and more of these examples come to light of businesses, of the power of data being used, sometimes for good, but also sometimes for bad. I think there's going to be a heightened, customers will be more heightened aware of this, and will actively choose products that don't do that. And I think there'll be this whole market of data consciousness in terms of business. Who do we share your data with? What do we do with your own data? How do we treat your PII information, etc.? So I think it's a real risk to the data industry, as I guess we'll call it, but something we need to be mindful of moving forward.
Yeah, just one small point to add on that, because it's such an interesting point, is obviously there's loads of opportunity for data collection. There's tons of data in the world, and it goes up every single hour, every single minute, and there's never be a question, is there enough data? It's almost a question what you do with it. Like, no one minds when Spotify collects your data to play your best song. No one minds when Netflix shows you should watch The Crown or whatever you want to watch. So it's a question of how you use that data to benefit the customer at the end of the day. And on the real-time piece, of course you can get real-time data. It's just a question of where it comes from and what your data source is. So there's so many variations of where is data collected in the life cycle of the customer, how is it used, what's useful and what isn't. Most of it isn't useful. There's only a small percentage which is really useful, actionable, and can make the customer happy. So it's such a massive world. Like the data world is endless. Like it's like a giant universe that we'll never get to the bottom of. We'll never know which data galaxy is the right one. But there is so much to do, and I think the next 10 years we are going to see an awesome change, just like we saw with Spotify, just like we saw with Netflix beating blockbusters, and HMV was taken over by Spotify in a similar way. We're going to see that across the whole business spectrum, and it's going to be awesome.
And how do we kind of make sure we're gathering the right data that we need, I suppose, to your point? Because I know, when we talk about the end user, certainly people can put in an email address and a first name and ignore a lot of other parts. So this might be something maybe Philip or Charlie could touch on there, about how you actually ensure that's kind of clean when you actually then want to go and use it and gain those insights.
Yeah, so I'm happy to jump in on that. I think, as sort of Charlie alluded to, I think at the moment we're coming through the first iteration of this, this new data maturity, and it really is at the moment. I think the early stages, it's the Wild West. We don't really have data engineering in place, and I think for me and for Solidaris, it very much is, how do we, like all other engineering disciplines, how do we get from building a house out of mud and sticks to building a skyscraper out of high tensile steel and all these different kind of well understood componentry. And I think where we are with the data space is very much at the start of that. So it's very much an evolution that needs to occur. We need to to gain maturity, and maturity will come with time. Will come with new technology, with new thought on how we actually collect this data. Standardization, I think, the use of structures to enable us to ensure conformity of data, completeness of data, accuracy of data. I think these are things which, as you said, you can put first name into a first name field, or you could put your email address into the first name field. There is no kind of how are we protecting the users from putting the correct set of data in, and being able to then to rely on that. And I think there's a lot to do with, as was pointed out, focusing on your customer. What is the customer? What's the data that you need to drive your customer's success? Really putting the customer at the heart of all decisioning. So it's I think for me it's very much the principles that are followed or laid out in GDPR. Privacy by default and by design. It really needs to be customer by default and by design. Everything you should do should always link back to that customer and the customer journey. And so that's the the data sets that we should be collecting and focusing on, and not really all of the additional things which don't benefit the customer.
Definitely, and I think that's interesting in terms of perhaps even Metal's product, which is not necessarily aimed at fintech people, even though these are entrepreneurs and people like that. So how do you kind of reconcile that and know that people that are using your product aren't necessarily as enthusiastic about data as perhaps some of us on the panel might be?
Yeah, I mean, it's been touched on. I guess we're only collecting data that customers need, and we use it in a way that benefits them. And I think what we're really passionate about at Metal is just being upfront with that. We're collecting this information, at your discretion, because we're going to use it for X or for Y. And I think that just humanizes the brand. It puts yourself on a level with customers and puts you in their shoes. And I think what customers are sick of is just read this privacy policy and click OK, and everything will be all right, and then you'll find out later down the line that your data is being used in other ways that maybe you didn't know about. And actually, like I touched on before, I think customers will reject that over time. We can have a short-term benefit on it now, use it now, but ultimately, I think it's the brands that are really conscious about this that are gonna win. And in terms of our customer set, like you said, they're not fintech enthusiasts. They're everyday people. There's over 5 million people across the UK who are doing a side hustle at the moment. There are over 1 million small business owners. These people are just ordinary people that want to make their passion their livelihood, or to add a passion to their primary income. Teaching piano on the side, as I used to do 10 years ago. So and actually they just want a product that's easy, that works, and with a brand that understands them. And so that's why I think being ethical with your data treatment and being really upfront and honest and really put the customer's needs off the back of that at the core means that you'll win further down the line.
Jack, that's a really good point. The talk about side hustles and teaching the piano on the side. Can you explain to our listeners about the album you just recorded that I saw in your LinkedIn profile?
I know you put me on the spot with this, Sam. So before I joined Metal, I actually took a year out to record my own album, which will be on Spotify in the next couple of months. So it's taken a bit of a while. Obviously, Metal's it's not a side hustle for myself, it's a full-time job. So, but yeah, be sure to circulate it out on my LinkedIn once it's ready to go.
What type of music is it, Jay?
It's prog rock, if you can tell from the Pink Floyd album cover on the wall.
Awesome. I look forward to it.
Cheers.
That's great, and I'm sure we can use lots of data insights to market that. So it will be you're in the right place to be sharing that and getting a lot of listeners, I'm sure. So kind of where, I suppose the next question is what's missing. So what issues are we still facing in financial services when it comes to going from, like we said, we've got all the data, we know that we have a huge amount of information, but how do we actually distill that and use it to make a difference? So, Sam, what are your thoughts on what you'd kind of like to see happen we're not doing already?
Well, I think it's doubling down, actually. You can't expect organizations to have all the tools at their fingertips. And particularly when you talk to data, Dun & Bradstreet has been in business for 180 years, has 30,000 plus data sources around the world, and a ton of ultimate exhaust data that's being collected every day. That's a full-time job for a very large organization. We launched last year something called D&B Accelerate. D&B Accelerate in the UK is run by a chap called Nick White, where we take our data and partner it with solutions in the market. So take, for example, financial crime visualization firm Quantexa. Quantexa's got incredible AI and visualization analytics, but needs the data to then bring it to life. So our partnership was perfect, and we took it to market together. That's what I think is missing, forming really rich, complementary and synergistic partnerships that ultimately deliver best-in-class capability the market. So a little bit self-serving, but I really do think you need to find a great data partner, a great analytics partner, and go to market together. That for me is the holy grail.
So do others agree that these partnerships are definitely the future if we're going to make the most out of what we've got?
I think so.
I mean, it's almost a slight extension to what Philip was saying, and the other question as well, to how do we make it useful? I think if the partnerships, of course, are very useful, and as Sam says, there's so many data sources. 30,000 on Bradstreet alone is massive. But if we sort of flip it on its head and say, okay, what is the objective of collecting the data, and then how are we going to meet the objective of collecting the data? It's a slightly different way of looking at it. So there are so many things that can be achieved with it. But to use your example of email alone, email alone has over 20 different data points that you can take from it. So there's so much multi-layered analysis that can go into meeting objectives, and partnerships is a great way of doing that. But I think from a leadership perspective, from businesses, they need to be absolutely on point about what are they trying to achieve, what are they going to do with this data which will better the customer.
Yeah, and I think really it's a data ecosystem. There is no one tool that is able to source your data, to analyze your data, to visualize your data. And I think that for us is really the key, is understanding that we're part of an ecosystem. And in order for an ecosystem to exist and to flourish, there needs to be this symbiosis to it. So you need to be able to easily work well together. And this goes back to sort of some of the standards that I was talking about. Just interoperability of data. How do we make that really, really simple, so we're not arguing over data formats? And we're not saying, well, the industry standard is this, when actually half the industry wants to do something else. I think in order to move forward with the value creation for the customers, we kind of need to get the back end really consistent and really easy. It needs to be simple. There needs to be a low barrier to entry, and I think that's the big thing that fintechs are bringing is reducing that barrier to entry. It's no longer let's say a big incumbent who is locking out everyone else. It's now the fintechs who are not doing everything, just choosing a niche area and focusing on that, doing that really, really well, and bringing that to market. And then, as Sam said, finding a partner who actually adds a bit of value to them to say, actually, this is going to add more value to our product. And really then, you're starting to create this network of partnerships and data transfer, data analysis. And really for Solidatus, being in the fintech space, one of the things that we're always cognizant of is the regulators and the regulations. So it's, how can we evidence the fact of where the data is going? How can we demonstrate clearly that, while we've said, we're going to use your data for this purpose, but actually someone in our organization isn't using it for some other purpose? Really being able to evidence that chain. And that's really kind of the focus of Solidatus. As I mentioned, the linking of the data sets together, be able to see, the evidence, the traceability of how data flows through an organization, and even how it flows from external to internal. So I think, we need to really focus on those simple underlying basic conditions, interoperability of data, standardization, those type of things, so that we do lower the barrier to entry, and it doesn't become a, you have to be X size and have X kind of technology behind you to get into this market, so we can innovate and continue to innovate. So I think it's really important that we have that.
Definitely, and I think that comes back to something we talk about a lot in fintech, which is the problem first, rather than having all these tools and all this data at our fingertips, and kind of actually thinking, what do we want to achieve at the end of it before we decide who to partner with or decide what tools we need to use. And I think there's a question actually come through around privacy as well, and I think that comes back into the trust element too. And Charlie, I know that you kind of manage a lot of relationships, I suppose, in the B2B space, and there needs to be that kind of element of safety and trust. So how do you go through that process with your customers and assure them that this data is safe and that it's actually being used for a purpose rather than just kind of gathering everything?
Sure. Well, I mean, to use email as the example, there are 20 different data points of email. Some of those are sensitive, some are not, some are personal, some are not. So you need to look at each data point that's coming through and work out which things are private, which things are not, and not use the ones that expose or ruin the trust of the customer. So I think you have to look at it very, very granularly and understanding what it is. I think the issue is when you look at data as a whole, there's just so much of it, so much variation. Most people are totally unaware of this data, which is a bad thing. I mean, if you look at the recent WhatsApp versus Signal public debacle, it's a good example of people weren't quite aware of how much data they were giving away for free. So as a result, that balance of trust was shifted and lost, or potentially being lost. So I suppose it's a question of breaking it down, getting granular, working it out, and setting a baseline for it and moving from there.
Definitely, and I think that, as you say, that security element only really comes up for the user when something goes wrong or when something comes out in the press, but it can really damage the brand, I suppose. Jack, have you got any thoughts on how to kind of maintain that strong brand and that trust?
Yeah, I mean, that's the perfect example, Charlie, right? You know, WhatsApp or Facebook have been gathering all of this data, you know, in certain countries, potentially reading your messages, using that to target you, or potentially could in the future. And that scares the living daylights out of people, right? You know, there's all these conspiracies of like, oh, I said the word very liquid to somebody on a message and then suddenly I'm targeted on Facebook, right? People don't want that. You know, they want responsibility and they want transparency. And that's the thing that WhatsApp completely missed the ball on with this, right? They just wanted to force through a privacy policy change, and let people accept it because they think their service is that great. You know, and it is a top quality service, but other people are catching up with the new vector, right? And the vector is data transparency and security, right? Privacy. And you know, Signal are very clear on what they do with your data and or what they actively don't do with your data. And I think people will naturally tend to that. You know, so when it comes to say the business banking sector with Metal, for example, you know, we just tell people, well, we're going to use, if you consent to this, we're going to use your data in this way. You know, marketing consents is a good one. Would you like us to share your data, you know, use your data to share with relevant third parties that we think you might be interested in, yes or no? If you say no, that's cool. If you say yes, great, and we'll be responsible with it. And then it's down to the brand to be able to say and serve the right message to the right customer at the right time. And if you do that in a way that customers know and want, then ultimately I think you'll win down the line and you'll save yourself all these scandals along the way.
Do you guys think there's a line between, I guess, providing these super tailored insights that we all want to achieve and scaring people away?
Yeah, I definitely think there's an education piece to it, and again, you know, depending on the comfortability or the maturity of people with data, I think there is definitely a line which is a very difficult one to walk. You know, for millennials and for people who are kind of data aware, then I think the line is much further to the right. But for say older generations who are, you know, really not familiar with, you know, let's say what can be achieved through inference, you know, being able to say, well, you know, if I collect these few data points, I can actually infer all of this information about you and really kind of have a very, very, through AI and machine learning, have a really, really good understanding of you as an individual, far more than you probably want me to have. So I think there is a definite sort of maturity line that different people are on in terms of their, you know, their ability to be comfortable with the data that is being collected. I think for a lot of the, you know, the newer generations, because they are so, you know, data aware, it's now, this is something of value for me, and I can use that to effectively sell to organizations, and so I can monetize myself and my own data. And I think that's going to be an interesting, you know, next few years and probably next decade is how does that shift from, you know, the individual saying, actually, this is something that, you know, is monetizable at an individual level, and I expect to see some, you know, value. At the moment, you know, we get free applications which we can use, and that's the monetization that we're receiving. But I think it's shifting further and further to the right, where people are expecting actually to receive something, not only to be able to use, you know, say, a service for free, but actually to receive something as part of that piece.
And people are scared as well. I mean, it is scary, some of this data. So it's about when the pendulum swung to people being out of control and not knowing that all this data is being used for things like the very liquid example, as you mentioned, Jack, which I've heard of quite a few times. Which is funny how you mentioned something and all of a sudden you get advertised it when you didn't tell anyone else. So I think people need to feel in control. People need to know what's going on. And if they don't feel that, then there will be unhappiness.
We've talked about that, yeah, I guess in the B2C space, with people feeling like their Alexa device or other brands are available is listening to them. But what are the sensitivities, I guess, in the B2B space with that? Because you've got the issue not only of losing customers if something goes wrong, but of losing that whole partner and impacting their business and their customers too.
Yeah, I think this all comes back to data trust, right? Whether it's an individual or an organization, I think trust is the ultimate thing that all of us are looking to exchange with each other. And that's how commerce works, right? We trust someone, we trust our currencies, we trust our governments, and so therefore, we're able to live in the society we are. I think the data trust is a really important factor, and the loss of that, I think, is very, very easy now to occur, whereas to gain it back is very, very difficult. I think it's the same as reputation. Reputation, the same thing, right? It takes years to build, but lost in a second. So I think it is, from a customer perspective, something that we really need to focus on. Building and establishing that trust, being transparent, being able to say exactly as Jack mentioned, like, this is the data that we're collecting, this is what we're using it for, and it won't be used in any other fashion. And we can evidence that to you if you want to see where your data is being used across their organization. Make a request and we'll provide that information to you. And I think that kind of transparency, which a lot of the regulations like GDPR here in obviously the UK and in Europe have established, in the US, things like CCPA and CPRA are doing the same types of things. And really, I think that will be borne out more and more across the world, that we'll get more of these much more prescriptive privacy regulations to try and protect the individuals and their data. And again, the governments want to have that level of trust so we can continue to operate as we currently are. And so I think trust for me is the big thing that the data hopefully should be able to make us achieve much more quickly, but equally lose quite quickly if it's used in the wrong fashion.
I think we're going to see more and more brands put this as part of their brand core, right, and part of their the purpose of their existence. And you'll see lots more companies be created with this as part of their manifestos as well. So I can definitely see in 2-3 years' time, along with sustainability being a really big focus, ethical treatment of data, or having a data pledge, I think is going to be almost mandatory for every business. So and being really explicit with what we will and won't do, and elevating it to that level. It won't just be throughout the journey these days. I think it will be, if it's baked into the DNA of a company, then I trust them, and if it's not, then I don't. Generally, people get to that extreme.
We're already seeing that in the ESG evolution, and it's already a core tenet, really, of the G component. I think there's also not just a push towards using data responsibly internally and the collection of data, but then how you use it externally. And with a CMO hat on, that I'm sure Jack will appreciate, it's important that we don't go about the old ways of the historic marketing ways of carpet bombing your possible prospect universe, and actually the ABM approach is done really targeted, but in a way that adds value and does it when they want your customer, you want that value added. And if you look at new tools and data capabilities like intent data that tell you where a customer is in their buying cycle, what they're going to want, when they're going to want it, who to deliver it to, that allows you to be really, really precise and I guess ultimately add much, much more value to those that you're seeking to go after. So yeah, there's going to be all sorts of big pushes, I think, in that direction from an ethical standpoint as well. And in the same way, GDPR won't let me email 1,000 people all at one time to come to my birthday party. So companies shouldn't be allowed to mass market unless it's through certain channels, I don't think.
Definitely. And Sam, I wanted to ask you as well, from a Dun & Bradstreet perspective, talked about having that really established brand, and obviously having been supporting customers for such a long period of time, it must be really important to kind of maintain that trust and make sure that you're really staying up to date with all those things, and like you say, being ethical as well with what you do. Yeah,
it's like literally the most important thing that we do. And we took Dun & Bradstreet private a couple of years ago, and that was where we first started spending our time and attention. You can't please everyone all the time. but you can definitely always have the right ethics embedded throughout the organization. And Dun & Bradstreet does a great job of that. It's a highly regulated business, and we take it very, very seriously. But that's really portrayed in how every single employee carries themselves, from the ops teams to the salespeople. So yeah, it is. You're right. It's critical, and it's an evolving landscape at lightning pace. So you got to stay sharp.
That's it. And I think talking about that established brand, we've talked about how fintechs are looking to use data to provide all these different insights to their customers, and I think that's been obviously something that's been really popular with all users. But incumbent banks as well, they have so much data because they've had these relationships with customers. It could be for decades. So how do you guys on the panel think that we can kind of marry those two things? I guess it's all about partnerships, right?
Yeah, definitely. I think the age of people owning a customer, that whole mentality is just gone, right? It's who do I need to partner with to offer the best experience, best experience to customers, and I actually think it's this ecosystem and Philip, to your point, it's the interoperability, right, of the different platforms, but also of different data sources, to be able to offer the best service to customers. So it's not nobody's a one-stop shop anymore, and neither should they be, right? And that's what's going to give that's what's going to drive progress forward, right? A service for banking, a service for lending, a service for whatever it is, and just being able to seamlessly move yourself or your service across all of those different platforms, I think is going to be really important. And it was something customers demand. So if you can't do that, you can't use your own data, you're still stuck in the past, then that's going to you're going to come unstuck down the line.
And then once we've built these products, obviously that we feel the market really needs based on our insights, how do we use those insights to market the product, to cut through the noise and to maintain that brand? Sam, I'm sure Dun & Bradstreet has a lot of advice on that.
Sorry, I was on mute. It really does. And well, there's a ton of questions. I'm just looking down the side here that we might want to get to if that's possible, because I think we're going to be running out of time soon.
Yeah, I think if we're looking at, I think a lot of what we're looking at is really analytics on the supply chain and the supply chain with the end recipient being the customer. So where are they in their cycle? What are the data points which are interesting to them at that point in time, and being able to make sure that you're delivering on those. So it's no longer this customer has this need. It's when do they have that need? Where is it appropriate to provide that information? And I think there is a lot of really great analytics that are able to be captured. When you capture the data about a customer and break it down into multiple facets, and not just look at them as a kind of a one-dimensional entity. It really is kind of understanding that there are a lot of components that make up a customer, and time is obviously one of those that you need to be focused on.
Yeah, and to just follow up on both that point with the Philip and Jack there, which is so interesting, is the fragmentation of the services, but the more tailored they'll become to the customer could in theory mean that all those historical ways of owning the customer, as you say, Jack, will go. And if you look at the press industry, the press used to just be 5 newspapers we all read, and now it's millions of different blogs, posts, and whatever. If the same thing happens with products and services, and we're all human with different needs, wants, requirements at different times of our lives, then we'll see this excellent fragmentation and interesting evolution of all businesses, all products to become really tailored, really niche, and that will make everything sort of in line with how the world really is.
Of course, and I think as you mentioned, there's kind of such a lot of different products and solutions out there now, and it's so easy to switch either a different provider or to onboard to a new solution. So how do we kind of maintain that loyalty when we've got our customers on board, and kind of use the insights we have on them to kind of ensure that we're keeping that relationship going? I guess that's a question that every one of you will have to deal with.
Yeah, I think a lot of it, certainly from a company perspective, we all have CRM systems which are there to help manage the customer and the customer data that we capture. And certainly at Solidaris, what we've seen with our CRM system is that it's fit for purpose, but it's not fit for future purpose. It really doesn't give us the data insights and the ability to see data through multiple different lenses really very, very simply. All the data is there, but it's how do you access it in a simple way. And actually, one of the things that we're actually doing is implementing our product into our CRM system. So in the same way that we provide, say a lineage of data through an organization, we can provide a lineage of data through a customer. So we can see our customer, we can see all of the contacts that exist with them, all of the deals, all of the the opportunities, anything that they're involved in. If people in their organization are moving from organization to organization, who is the champion? Who is the person that is a key to the decision-making process, and not just having that sit in a standard database, but really have it in a graph that allows you to understand those relationships really simply. And I think for me, the graph space is adding a huge amount of value to the CRM space. So to knowing your customer, because you can get those insights far more quickly than you previously have been able to do. You don't have to write kind of very specific queries to get the data out. It's just all the data is connected, and all I need to do is, okay, I want that customer and everything about them, and I get that information. So for us, I think the integration of and the move of CRM to more cloud graph technology, I think is a real value add that we're seeing.
Philip, I mean, firstly, I completely agree with you. I think at the same time, though, I was having this conversation with the Salesforce CIO recently. The counterintuitive argument to all of this is that actually the most valuable data comes from one of the most basic skills, which is we've got to get much, much better at listening, and we've got to get much, much better at asking questions in the world that we live in. The best data we're going to get is going to come directly from our customer's mouth. And so in a world that you can't really spend much time together in, what you can do is leverage the fact that you can bring your A team to every meeting. It's much easier to get on the phone now with a C-level executive at a firm you're trying to sell to, because they're not on an airplane in another country, different time zone. So yeah, I would definitely labor the point: get better at asking questions and listen really hard. And it's challenging because we're relying on the digital world much more these days.
Totally agree, Sam. Finger on the pulse, and it means reverting back to basics. And even on a mass market product, with B2C mass market, it can be done, right? You can make sure you're on hand with a human touch in-app chat. So, for example, at Metal, we have the in-app chat. We have a human tone of voice. We try to relate. We're putting it in their language, in customers' language, and then we're asking them what they think. Surveys. We have a star customer panel. We're looking at obviously macro data to try and figure out how they're going, what they're going through. I think COVID is a really good example. Lots of businesses, who've been massively affected by this. A wealth of quagmire actually of information out there, and it's a minefield, right? What am I entitled to? What am I not entitled to in terms of grants, support, etc. And I think a brand that can really stay in touch with all of those things, ask customers what they actually think, and then serve up actually something that's meaningful to them. I think that it's those brands that are going to win the day. And to your point, it means going back to basics. You can have all the data in your warehouses, and you can talk, have all the partnerships that you like. But really, it's what your customers say about you and what they actually need that will win the day, in my opinion.
Definitely. And Jack, you're kind of looking at a demographic, as you say, the side hustlers, and in this economy, that's only going to grow. And we'd be very naive to think that a lot of other fintechs won't kind of recognise that and kind of come into the market too. So what's your kind of plan over the next year to maintain those customers that you have and make sure they don't kind of switch to a different service, perhaps?
Yeah, I mean, lots of stuff I've just said around maintaining a strong relationship with customers. I think it's keeping your finger on the pulse with what their needs are, and being able to just build your product to those needs and be able to do it in a scalable way. And I think so. Just that's from a product point of view, just being able to keep it with the Joneses on it and offer best in class service. And then from a brand point of view, like I said, it's going to be around, do I relate to this brand? Do they understand me emotionally? And in this liquid workforce sort of side hustler world that we live in, these are people's passions, they're people's pet projects, they're their lives, and And I think a brand that can really understand that and relate to that, I think will be that they'll be the people that win the day. It's, you know, banking is no longer just a utility. You know, it's something that you've got to go through. You go on that journey with a customer, and you've got to grow with them. And so for us this year, it's just making sure that we do keep our finger on the pulse, and we do still put our customers at the centre of everything we do.
Definitely, and finally, you know, we're moving into 2021, I guess, and after almost a year of being in lockdown, we hope that we will be able to kind of meet each other again at some point. But it will definitely become, I suppose, more of a hybrid model of communication, with some people preferring to be remote and flexible, and others preferring to meet face to face. Charlie, I know that at FeedStock you've done a lot of work on kind of automating these processes that were people manually having to gather data from emails and things like that. But how will you kind of marry those two elements together, where you are asking those questions in person and also through kind of digital solutions?
I suppose the way we're looking at it is, although everyone is no longer near each other, they were never really that near each other anyway. They were in an office perhaps, but they were 3 desks away, and you could maybe shout something over, but you may not be able to really understand what's going on anyway. However, the proximity that we had then gave us assurance that the data points we were putting into the system were somehow valid, because we felt warm and fuzzy because people were close. Now we're not. People are thinking about it a different way, thinking about it a new way. So the way we're looking at it, and the way we look at CRMs and these manual approaches, is we think that these CRMs, which we call systems of record, have had their day. They've done great things. They are databases. That's what they were designed for. They're encroaching now on the freedoms and the creativity of salespeople to do their job properly. So we've created a new approach to automatically understand who talks to who about what, and to try and help client relationships be better. Similar to what Philip was saying, you know, there's so much data that can be done automatically, and every time you ask someone to input data into a system, you are A, wasting their time, and B, trying to produce a data set that will not be cohesive and linked to other people who've inputted data in the system. So you need a centralized view which is clean. And if you can't get clean data, you won't get a clean outcome.
Exactly, and I think it's interesting what you said. We talked about the opportunities that fintech has actually seen over the past year. Perhaps we're one of the few sectors who's thinking, well, I hope things don't go back to exactly the way they were, because we've actually been able to communicate so well and gather so many insights. So I think, yeah, it will be a challenge when we kind of go into this new normal as to how businesses can react.
Yeah, I think it's going to be a double-edged sword. So I think a lot of the clients that we're wanting to interact with, some are going to go back into offices. Some have said actually we're not going back into that full-time sort of working space. And then I mean for a fintech, and especially as a rapidly growing fintech, I think when you're trying to build a company and onboard significant amount of people remotely, there is challenges just with building a fintech culture. That really exciting place to work is difficult to replicate when everyone's in their own homes, and half of the people in the organization they may have never met before. And for us, so that's a real point of we're very focused on when we're allowed to bringing people together so that they can actually meet and really keep that fintech spirit and culture as part of the company. And then I think it will hopefully then continue to manifest that we'll be able to meet with our clients. Because I think, well, certainly from our perspective, I think having that, as Sam kind of pointed out, being able to really get to know your client, to talk to your client, to listen to your client is really important. And being human, I think face to face is always you do add a huge amount of value, which we don't want to replace purely with technology. I think technology should be there to replace the bits which should be replaced, kind of the bits which we don't actually want to do in person, or it don't make sense to do in person. Really automate where it makes sense, not try and just automate everything so we sit at home by ourselves. And so I think it's going to be a challenge for all organizations to work out that balance between, once you're back, how do you maintain a culture? Like how do you maintain 180-year-old culture like Dun & Bradstreet when everyone works from home, when you're trying to build that new generation of people coming through, trying to instill that. And that's one of the things that we've certainly seen as probably the biggest challenge when you're growing and growing fast is maintaining that really exciting culture that all fintechs have. And I think that's an area that we were certainly putting a lot of emphasis on. making sure that our clients, which are also our employees, are really happy and part of the journey that we're going on.
Definitely, and thanks. Yeah, I think that's really interesting to think about as we go into the next year. I just want to get to a couple of the audience questions that we didn't already bring in. Somebody's asked, there's a lot of asymmetry around different jurisdictions in terms of data privacy laws, which we've kind of heard about a lot over the past year in the news as well. Are there kind of opportunities there that we can take advantage of, or does it present challenges? Sam, what are your kind of thoughts on that from kind of an international perspective, I suppose?
Sorry, could you repeat the question? My signal is terrible here, and I don't know if I ducked out for a moment as well.
No problem. Yeah, we lost you for a second, but we're glad
Combination
you're
of battery and internet.
back. It's just a question around data privacy laws. There's a kind of asymmetry among different jurisdictions. So, as a global business, I guess, do you guys see kind of opportunities there, or does it present a lot of challenges for you?
No, I think it's a. Can you hear me? Okay.
Yeah.
Making very funny noises. I think there's a combination. Obviously, I think the regulatory environment is largely there to protect the client and the consumer alike. And organizations like ours have to work within very tight framework. The most exciting stuff happens right on the leading edge. If you look at the alternate data sphere, there's a ton of really exciting ways in which we can source and structure new data and then provide fascinating new insights. But to the very liquid example earlier, you don't want to shock your clients, and you've got to adjust at lightning pace, because as new sources become available, so do new regulations that prohibit certain types of usage. So you've got to be super nimble. And then for an organization like ours that operates in every region in the world, it's an exhausting process, but something that requires daily, minute-by-minute attention to ensure that you're keeping up to speed. And there's a ton of opportunity in this space. One of the areas I'd highlight is in the UK. Later this year, it's very likely that data and cloud investments are going to become part of the UK government's policy, included within R&D rebates. So now organizations that invest in data will be able to reclaim from the government a portion of their R&D spend in that area. That's a really positive example. And if that happens around the world, it's great news for our clients, and I think really encouraging to the worlds that we all operate in.
Definitely. And does anyone have any thoughts on how kind of fintech startups can kind of, I suppose, bake that in from day one and make sure that they're compliant and they're up to date with all these regulations? I know it's not something every founder wants to think about when they're excited to get their idea off the ground.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's certainly for us something that we deal with a lot of our clients. Having the very large multinationals as clients, the jurisdictional challenges over data privacy are immense. I mean, you could be, as Dun & Bradstreet is, operating in 50 different jurisdictions, which might mean 50 different privacy regulations that you have to adhere to. And the problem is these things aren't static; they're changing fairly frequently because it's an evolving space. And so for an organization, it's a huge overhead, and one that we've actually helped one of the sort of the global tier 1 banks solve is their internal data sharing, data privacy agreements. How do we automate that? And effectively, by building a decisioning model within Solidaris, we were able to take something which was taking up to 4 months to get a decision down to 3 minutes, and that was based off digitizing regulation, putting in guardrails, putting in policies and matching policies to regulation. So it is a big burden for a lot of the organizations. We have several clients who are struggling with this, but I think there are solutions out there that fintech is bringing that alternative view on how it can be solved, and really it's certainly a big area for us that a lot of our clients are looking for at the moment is how do we solve and make that privacy regulation cost far less than it currently does. And I think it's a big challenge for everyone who is multinational. Not so much for for a fintech, because we're sort of generally singularly jurisdictionally based, but for our clients for sure.
Great. Well, I think that's kind of all we have time for. So thanks very much, everyone. I think it's really useful to know kind of how we can really understand who our partners and customers are and use data to do that. So I just want to say a big thank you once again to Sam from Dun & Bradstreet, Philip from Solidaris, Charlie from FeedStock, and Jack from Metal. If you did miss anything on the webinar, it will be available on demand on our website, and I look forward to joining you again in a couple of weeks where we're going to talk about diversity and inclusion in fintech. So thanks very much, everyone, and hope you have a great day.
Yeah, good. Thanks very much, everyone.
Cheers.
Thanks, guys.